What unfolded in the Senate this week wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it landed harder than most shouting matches you've seen in Parliament. Because this wasn't about party lines or clever sound bites. It was about something far more uncomfortable: taxpayer money, extremist rhetoric, and a question no government ever once asked out loud. If you live in Australia, if you pay taxes, if you care about where this country draws its moral lines, this moment involves you. It started as a routine exchange, the kind most people would scroll past, but within minutes, the atmosphere changed, because the subject wasn't abstract foreign policy or distant conflict. It was public funding meant for social cohesion, and whether it had any connection, even indirectly, to an event where terrorist violence was praised. And once that idea entered the room, there was no way to keep this conversation neutral. Before we go any further, pause for a second. Where are you watching this from right now? Australia? Overseas? Drop it in the comments, because perspective matters for what comes next.
Senator Paterson.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. An article in The Australian today revealed that the Lebanese Muslim Association, an organisation awarded a $1.65 million social cohesion grant by the Albanese government, joined with the extremist organisation Hizb ut-Tahrir to host a rally last night to mark the one-year anniversary of October 7, where speakers celebrated terrorist attacks as a day of celebration. Minister, do you think it's appropriate to give taxpayers' money for social cohesion to an organisation which supported a protest on the anniversary of the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust?
Thank you, Senator Paterson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, first, in relation to the last part of the question, I think we are united in our condemnation of what occurred on October 7th. It was an atrocity. It was not only the greatest loss of Jewish life in any single day since the Holocaust, but there were also so many other Israeli citizens who were harmed and are living with that. We also have hostages who are still held. We, I think, are united in our condemnation of Hamas, which is, as I keep reminding people in this place, a terrorist organisation that is dedicated to the destruction of the Jewish
The question
state.
itself didn't sound explosive. At first, it was framed carefully, calmly, procedurally. A senator asked whether an organisation that had received a substantial government grant, a grant designed to promote unity and cohesion, was linked to a public rally. That alone raised eyebrows. But then came the detail that changed everything. The rally marked the anniversary of October 7, and suddenly this wasn't just another date on the calendar. October 7 represents the deadliest single day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. That's not rhetoric, that's historical fact. For many Australians watching, especially Jewish families, veterans and those with loved ones serving in uniform, that date carries weight far beyond politics. So when the implications surfaced that an event tied to that anniversary included speakers praising terrorist violence, the room stiffened. This wasn't about free speech debates anymore, it was about responsibility. Is it appropriate for public money, your money, intended to bring communities together, to be connected in any way to events that glorify terror? That question doesn't live in policy manuals, it lives in the gut, and once it was asked, it couldn't be taken back. If you're still with me, stay close here, because what followed didn't calm the situation, it made it heavier.
As they should be. In relation to Hizb ut-Tahrir, I condemn those hateful comments, and I've consistently done that. Just as I have been clear about, I have done so publicly, Senator.
Order.
Thank
Senator
you.
McKenzie, order.
And I have condemned the flying of the Hezbollah flag and symbols and I think we all should. And we are at a time when we see a lot of division in our society.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Paterson.
Thank you, President. On a direct relevance, I asked the Minister about a grant for social cohesion to organisation that hosted a rally celebrating October 7. She's not responded 90 seconds into the question.
Thank you, Senator Paterson, and I note that your question was broader than that, and I think the Minister is being relevant, and I will continue to listen carefully. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I was responding to the last part of your question, Senator Paterson. In relation to Hizb ut-Tahrir, we would say, I've said previously to you, Senator Paterson, that we take advice about our security intelligence agencies about where to list their organisations. I won't speculate publicly about that.
Order.
In relation to the grant, the advice I have is no government funding has supported such events or rallies. $25 million was provided to the Australian Jewish community and to support, and $25 million to support Palestinian.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Paterson, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Separate media reports revealed that United Muslim Australia's Sheikh Ibrahim Dadoun praised the October 7 terrorist attacks at this rally, claiming victory is coming soon. This comes after the Assistant Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs, Julian Hill, invited United Muslims Australia to also apply for a social cohesion grant from the Commonwealth Government. Will the Prime Minister intervene to rescind these grants and ensure no more taxpayer money will go to organisations promoting extremist and anti-Semitic views?
Thank you, Senator Paterson. Minister Wong.
Thank you. What I was going to go on to say, the advice I have is $25 million was provided to support the Australian Jewish community and $25 million to support Australian Palestinian, Muslim, Christian and other communities affected by the conflict in the Middle East. Funding to the Lebanese Muslim Association was for trauma support, mental health and youth-related work. Now, I understand the point that the Senator is making. I would respond in relation to was it Mr. Baydon, I think was the quote that you talked about. I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. Certainly in relation to the speaker at the rally that I thought you were referencing, the Home Affairs Minister has made, the Minister for Immigration has made clear he has asked his department to conduct a visa check.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Paterson, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. At the same event, an American guest speaker, Khaled Badoun, said, "Today is not a day that is full of mourning. Today is a day that marks celebration." The Department of Home Affairs later confirmed he is travelling here on a visa. How did Mr Badoun pass the character test for this visa, given that he publicly praised slain Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah on social media 1 week ago?
Thank you, Senator Paterson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Paterson. That was the speaker which I was referencing in my previous answer. First, I'd say very clearly that the government, all of us, condemn his comments. There is nothing to celebrate about October 7th, and it's a revolting thing to suggest that there is. As I understand, the Minister said clearly he's asked for advice from the department so he can consider this person's visa status. Obviously, the information that I'll take advice on the information that you outline. I would assume that would not have been brought to the Minister's attention before the department issued a visa.
Thank you, Minister. Senator.
October 7 isn't a talking point, it isn't a slogan, and it isn't something you neutralise with bureaucratic language. For Jewish communities around the world, that date represents trauma on a scale that doesn't fade with time. It's remembered the way other societies remember their darkest days, with grief, anger and fear stitched together. That's why this moment in the Senate cut deeper than most parliamentary exchanges, because no one was arguing about abstract ideology. They were arguing about whether Australia's systems had allowed something unthinkable to brush up against public funding. This wasn't about taking sides in a foreign conflict. It was about whether Australia draws a hard line when terror is praised, or whether that line becomes flexible when paperwork says otherwise. That distinction matters more than politicians often realise. Ordinary Australians don't dissect grant categories. They don't separate direct funding from indirect association with legal precision. They hear one thing: money meant to unite communities, mentioned in the same breath as rhetoric that celebrates violence. And once people hear that, reassurance becomes harder. If you believe public funds should never even risk amplifying extremist messaging, even accidentally, say that below. Because this is exactly where public trust starts slipping. And that's what made the response so critical. The response came quickly, measured, deliberate, carefully chosen. There was clear condemnation of the October 7 atrocities, clear condemnation of Hamas as a terrorist organisation, clear acknowledgement of the suffering of victims and hostages. On that point, there was no disagreement in the chamber, and that unity mattered. But unity on condemnation didn't dissolve the tension, it sharpened it. Because condemning terror is the baseline. It's the starting line, not the finish. The unanswered questions still hung in the air. How did a grant intended for cohesion end up orbiting an event where terror was praised? The answers leaned heavily on distinctions. No direct funding supported the rally. Advice had been received. Processes were followed. Other grants were highlighted, including substantial funding for the Australian Jewish community. All of that may be true. But here's the problem. Outside the chamber, those explanations don't land the way they're intended. To someone watching at home, it can sound like this. Yes, it looks bad, but technically the boxes were ticked. That's not reassurance, that's distance. And distance is dangerous when you're dealing with fear, grief, and national security concerns. Because when people feel like leaders are hiding behind process, they stop listening to explanations. They start asking harder questions. And those questions were coming. If you're still here, don't drift, because the next shift in this exchange raised the stakes far beyond funding. Type something below if you're still following closely. This is where the conversation stopped being theoretical. The tension didn't fade after the condemnation, it thickened. Because once the emotional weight of October 7 was acknowledged, the focus snapped back to something colder and sharper: responsibility. The follow-up questions weren't ideological, they weren't dramatic, they were procedural, and that made them more dangerous. Had government money flowed to organisations linked to events celebrating terrorist violence? Yes or no? Who approved the grant? Who signed off? And at what point did anyone ask what platforms these organisations were connected to? The chamber could feel it. This wasn't about catching someone in a verbal slip, it was about tracing a paper trail, and every answer leaned the same way. Advice was received, funding streams were distinct, the rally itself wasn't funded, reviews were underway. Each response sounded reasonable on its own, but stacked together they created something else entirely, a picture of a system that reacts instead of anticipates. Because here's the truth most viewers felt immediately. Extremist rhetoric doesn't wait for reviews. It moves fast, it exploits gaps, and it doesn't care how well-intentioned a grant application looked on paper. If you're still watching at this point, stay with me, because the conversation was about to widen in a way that unsettled far more people than this grant ever could. Drop a comment if you've made it this far, not for the algorithm, but because what comes next affects borders, not just budgets. This is where the room shifted again, because funding wasn't the only concern anymore. Attention turned to an overseas speaker who had attended the same rally, someone who had previously made public statements praising a Hezbollah leader. And suddenly, the issue wasn't just money, it was access. How does someone with that history pass Australia's character tests? How does that square with what Australians are told about visa safeguards? This wasn't a fringe technicality. Australia prides itself on a migration system that protects national security, that screens for extremist sympathies, that draws clear lines. So when senators asked how this individual entered the country, the question carried weight far beyond the chamber. If this slipped through, what else does? The response acknowledged checks, acknowledged processes, acknowledged that departments were now looking into it. But the key word there is now, because for many watching, especially those with family in uniform or communities already feeling targeted, now feels late. This isn't paranoia, this is pattern recognition. Extremist networks test systems constantly. They probe for softness, they exploit hesitation, and the idea that Australia might be playing catch-up instead of staying ahead is deeply unsettling. If you believe visa checks should be airtight in an age of global radicalisation, say it plainly below, because this isn't a left-right issue, it's a trust issue, and the answers that followed didn't close that gap, they widened it.
By this point, the exchange had stopped feeling like a debate. It felt like a collision. On one side, fear, grief, and a demand for clarity. On the other, process, procedure, and careful language. Every answer returned to the same place. Reviews are underway, advice is being sought, departments are examining the matter. And on paper, that sounds responsible, but here's the problem. Extremism doesn't move at the speed of government reviews. It doesn't wait for departmental advice. It doesn't pause for risk assessments. It acts. And when people hear leaders lean heavily on process in moments like this, they don't feel protected. They feel managed. That distinction matters more than politicians like to admit, because Australians don't expect perfection. They expect urgency, especially when social cohesion grants exist for one reason: to prevent division and radicalization, not to risk amplifying it. This is where the emotional weight of the exchange settled, not on what was said, but on what wasn't decisively done. If you're watching this and thinking, why does it always feel like action comes after outrage? You're not alone. Drop your thoughts below. This question cuts across politics. And then came the moment no one could spin. There was no shouting, no dramatic interruption. Just a sentence that changed the tone of the entire exchange. An admission that information about some individuals' public statements may not have been known before visas were issued, that advice was still being sought, that decisions were pending. Read that again. Public praise for extremist figures may not have been identified until after entry was granted. For a government that speaks often about national security, that gap is uncomfortable, because it exposes a weakness not in values, but in execution. It raises a question Australians don't like asking, but can't ignore. Are our systems proactive or reactive? Do safeguards stop threats before they arrive, or only respond once headlines force attention? That's not a theoretical concern. It's tied to real-world consequences, to global networks, to violence that doesn't stay overseas. For many watching, especially within Jewish communities, this wasn't just unsettling, it was personal. And when the chamber eventually moved on, the unease stayed behind, because nothing had been resolved. It couldn't be. By the time the exchange ended, it was clear this wasn't about a single payment or a single rally. It was about systems, how Australia chooses partners, how community organisations are vetted, how social cohesion funding is monitored once the cheque clears. Because once public money enters the picture, responsibility doesn't end at approval, it deepens. This debate landed in a week already heavy with tension, protests, counter-protests, online rhetoric spilling into classrooms, streets and workplaces. Conflicts thousands of kilometres away suddenly felt close, and when citizens see imported extremism find space, whether through platforms, funding or visas, the expectation is simple:
draw the line, enforce it clearly. Opposition figures frame the exchange as evidence of softness, of a government more comfortable managing narratives than enforcing boundaries. Government defenders pointed to strong condemnation, ongoing reviews, and the complexity of balancing free expression with security. Both sides know the truth. Community tensions don't respect jurisdictional lines, they don't wait for elections, and they don't disappear with statements. Internationally, allies are watching too, not just listening to what Australia says, but measuring how fast it acts. In democratic societies facing rising extremism, hesitation is often read as weakness, and weakness invites testing. If you think leadership in moments like this should be decisive, not procedural, say it below, because this conversation isn't ending inside Parliament.
So this is where the debate really leaves us. Not with a clean resolution, not with a single answer, but with a reckoning. When public funding meant to unite communities brushes up against rhetoric that glorifies terror, who steps in and how fast? When visa systems miss warning signs, who takes responsibility? And when citizens ask for clarity, do leaders respond with action or with process? Australians watching this unfold will make their own judgments. Was this necessary caution or a failure to act quickly enough? Are current safeguards strong enough in an age of global radicalisation, or do they need urgent reform? Because the core issue isn't one grant or one visa, it's trust. Trust that the lines are clear, trust that they're enforced, and trust that taxpayer money never, even indirectly, legitimises hatred or violence. Now, I want to hear from you. Should grants be immediately withdrawn when organisations are linked to extremist events, even indirectly? Are visa checks strong enough today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Real answers, not slogans. Share this with someone following these debates closely. Subscribe if you want to keep tracking how these questions play out after the headlines fade. Because this story isn't over, and how it's handled next will tell Australians far more than what was said this week.